So I just want to say welcome and introduce myself. My name is Deana Lewis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm part of the In Our Names network, and I'll explain what that is in just a few moments. To describe myself, I am a Black woman with long curly hair. I'm wearing glasses, Audre Lorde earrings, a black shirt, and gray cardigan. I live in Chicago, which is the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, many of whom live, work, and continue to fight for recognition and liberation alongside other people of color. So today, my presentation is titled Documenting Police Sexual Violence in Schools, a PAR project. During this presentation, I'm going to do a few things. One, I'm going to ask you some questions to find out what you're thinking. I'm going to discuss safety in schools and police sexual violence in and around schools. I'll discuss our research project, of course, and then potentially problem solve and provide some best practices at the end. Before we get into everything, I want to give you a content warning. So we will be talking about police sexual violence, white supremacy, misogyny, and other structural types of violence. And also as an FYI, I might swear a little bit. So people in the background that you don't want to hear curse words, they might hear a couple curse words. And I want to remind you that you should take care of yourself. If this content is a little too much, that is absolutely fine. You can come back and come back to it when you're ready, or you can just leave it. So always take care of yourself. Also, I want to make a point to point out my PowerPoint. So I was trying to figure out what a good slide deck to use for discussing police sexual violence is, and it was difficult. I didn't want something that was, really bland and corporate. I also didn't want something that was really bubbly and happy. So I decided on this theme based on my own positionality. So who is Deana? Like I said at the beginning, I'm a Black cisgender woman. I'm also a feminist, a Black feminist, and an abolitionist. And what that means to me is that I work to imagine a new world and continue to build that world and pick up the work that people before me and next to me have begun. This leads me to the PowerPoint. So throughout the pandemic, I started really getting into plants. It was my thing. So I have over 60 plants in various stages. And I chose this PowerPoint template to indicate or signify that among the violence and oppression many people experience daily, there is hope and there is another world possible, and it is growing. So these plants symbolize the new life that grow and persist in all types of environments, just like abolitionist and anti-violence movements grow and persist in the face of repression. So remember that we, like plants, are always world building. So if it feels a little disconcerting, what you're seeing and hearing and trying to reconcile that, it's okay. It's absolutely fine. Abolition can be like that. And in that discomfort is when we can grow. Okay, so I have a couple questions for you that I want to get into. And I realize we don't have a huge number of people and that you might be watching this after I'm presenting live, but I still would like you to take a little bit of time to answer these questions. So write them down or type them in a Google Doc. We'll share out after. So I want you to think about these two questions. What did or does safety mean to you in your K-12 schooling experiences? Who kept you safe in your K-12 school experience? So I want you to think about those answers for a minute, jot something down. I'm going to ask people who are currently in the audience in just a few moments to share out what their thoughts are, to unmute themselves and share. But for now, I want to talk a little bit about the In Our Names network as you are still thinking through your answers. So the In Our Names network, or ION, was formed in 2016 at the Allied Media Conference in Detroit. And if you haven't gone to the Allied Media Conference, I highly suggest that you go. ION is a national network of people and organizations working to end all types of police violence against Black women, girls, trans, and gender expansive people. In 2019, we went to the Highlander Center in Tennessee. If you don't know about the Highlander, I highly suggest you look them up. And we went there to further hone our mission and goals for the organization. So our questions were really, what did we as ION really want to focus on? What were the goals of the organization? So I want to stop there and go back to these questions and ask you, can I have a couple of people unmute themselves to share, please? You can also drop your answers in the chat. So the questions, what did or does safety mean to you in your K-12 schooling experiences? And who kept you safe in your K-12 school experience?
Sure, I'll take that question. So I want to go with the second question of who kept me safe in my K-12 experience. So going to school in the 1900s, I had relationships, and my family had relationships with the people at the school, with my teachers. And so I felt very comfortable and safe in those classrooms. And in those classrooms, the teachers reflected me, both being Indigenous and Black. And that expanded beyond just in the school. It also expanded all the way home to getting to my house after leaving school. So it's like this community of people that recognized me, knew who I was, and also knew who I was accountable if I was the one that was acting up. And what does school safety mean to you in your K-12 schooling experiences? I think it resonates with my answer, is that it's as a climate and a community where I can show up fully with my identity and have it be accepted, included, and making sure that my needs are met.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I love the idea of like this, that you're in this community that is caring for you, not only your physical body, but your entire self. I see a couple of answers in the chat. I can read them out, or if one of you wants to come unmute yourselves, you're welcome to. I will read. So Brad says, what did safety mean? Good relationships with teachers and bus drivers, a place to hide, a recovery plan, and who kept me safe? Adults, probably more than they realize, and me. And Olivia, and I have to say, I have an Olivia in my house who's walking around and nervous because it's starting to thunder outside. So you might hear some click clacking happening. That's my poor dog being very anxious. But this Olivia in the audience says, feeling seen and heard in class made me feel safe. My teachers made me feel safe. And I love that these reflections are going back to good times for you. Kiana says, safety to me in K-12 meant being treated equally and fairly by all my teachers and staff. I agree, also being known and having relationships in the community. Who kept me safe for my family as well as other teachers of color. Yeah, this is all great. And Brad says again, I learned how to hide my non-visible identities. And Kiana, if I'm saying your name correctly, says free to make mistakes without terrible repercussions, always feeling encouraged. So thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. So what you're saying is one of the reasons why we decided to really form as an organization, but then start to think about what our specific goals were. So we wanted to make, and still want to make, interventions to make the world a safer place for Black women, girls, trans, and gender expansive people, and start to uncover this invisibilized sexual harm at school. And let me just go back to something that Brad dropped in the chat. We want to also allow people to show their full selves and be their full selves and not have to hide their non-visible identities and feel safe, not only in schools, but outside of schools, because we're interested in thinking about safety holistically. So physical body, emotionally, mentally. And we're also thinking about creating a safer world for people to be in. And part of that is uncovering this type of harm that's happening in schools. So this research project, we thought would support the work and the work of people and orgs such as the Advancement Project and Freedom Inc. They had launched or helped launch a national hashtag police free schools campaigns with many other orgs, and you might have those campaigns happening in your city. And if you search for the hashtag assault at on social media, you can learn more about, and I'll drop this in the chat. You can learn more about the stories, the statistics, and the actions folks are taking to stop police violence in schools. And we wanted to not only stop just police violence overall, but also bring to light police sexual violence in schools. And that is one of the reasons why we started this research to add to this fight. Okay. So as we dug into these ideas of safety in schools, and increasing reports of police harming young people in schools, we began planning this research project. So we started the planning in 2020. And we wanted to work with young people around the United States to document instances of police sexual violence in schools as a way to uncover the ways police, school resource officers, private security do not keep schools or Black trans youth, Black gender expansive youth, or Black girls safe, and actually put them in harm's way. The point was to have the young researchers talk with young people about their experiences, write a report that will support the hashtag police free schools campaigns, and also explicitly include these other marginalized youth, as I mentioned, Black trans youth, gender expansive youth, and girls in these campaigns. So begin to center them. So our goal overall was not only to uncover this type of violence, but also hold people accountable and responsible for this type of violence and ultimately end this violence. So before I continue, I have a couple more questions for you. What is police sexual violence? Okay, think about that. And what does police sexual violence look like in schools? So feel free to share. Again, you can drop your answers in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and answer. We have a couple, we have one answer in here. So Marika is saying state-sanctioned violence, adultification of girls, isolation of girls in space. Brad includes victim blaming. Absolutely. What are some other things that come to mind when you hear about police sexual violence or and also police sexual violence in schools? Sex-based harassment, absolutely. Says Kiana. Brad says abuse of power relationships. Marika says intimidation, physical handling of youth. Yes, absolutely. Olivia says violence against pregnant people. Yes, so this process is a process that we were going through as a group as we were planning. So we needed to ask ourselves, what do we consider police sexual violence? And then what does police sexual violence look like in schools to us? Like, what do we think police sexual violence in schools could be? So I'll tell you, we came up with, Marika, that's great. Marika says grooming, absolutely. So for ION, we define police sexual violence, or PSV, as the following. So PSV is a large umbrella term that includes non-consensual or under the threat of force or coercion, explicit and implicit sexually based actions by law enforcement. And I listed different types of law enforcement here. We're talking about law enforcement broadly. We're also talking about security officers, because in schools, there are not only school resource officers, there can also be, there can be Homeland Security, ICE, and other forms of law enforcement. State police could be there in and around schools. So the different types, talking about rape, molestation, catcalling, groping, and other sexual harassment. We also use another definition from a 2021 report called Shrouded in Silence, and I'll drop that link here. So PSV can be any act taking advantage of police authority and power to engage in sexually harassing, degrading, discriminatory, violative, or violent acts. So in schools, police sexual violence, as we were talking through this, can look like police physically sexually assaulting people. That's something relatively obvious. And then also the less obvious actions, such as flirting or asking for the phone numbers of young people, right? Police in order to flirt or to engage in sexual acts. So the idea that a lot of people have of these, police violence or sexual violence looks only like something very physical, is we're only getting part of the way there. We also want to capture these other ways that police authority figures are degrading or violating young people. I also want to give you a couple notes here, a couple stats. First is from a report by Walker and Erlbeck in 2003, and they found that 40% of cases of police sexual violence reported in the media in a single year involved teenagers and police youth engagement programs. That's just reported in the media, right? That's not representative of the reported or even non-reported assaults overall. And then second, from our In Our Names Network co-founder, Andrea Ritchie. So in her 2017 book titled Invisible No More, Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color, she writes that out of the many sexual misconduct acts law officials were caught in, more than 70% of cases involve motorists, crime victims, informants, students, and young people in job shadowing programs. So this is really sobering information. And as we were working through the definition and talking about this, and people were like, oh, I didn't even think about like getting, a police officer asking me for my phone number, or some flirting as a type of violence. And so after over a year of planning, discussing, searching for orgs, asking the orgs to find researchers, we launched the research project in July 2021. And we started with 4 organizations across the United States and began doing trainings on how to conduct research, what participatory action research looks like, introductions, getting to know you, trying to find out more about folks and build like a community. And we started to do other things. And we started this national participatory action research project in a pandemic, in the middle of racial uprisings, on Zoom. And so this leads me to a few of our findings. This is difficult work. Surprise. So not only are we doing this, not only did we start in the middle, or at the beginning of the pandemic, We started at a time of greater precarity for Black people, and especially young Black people. We are also asking young people to talk about very difficult, emotionally taxing topics. And we're asking them to be vulnerable when we haven't met them in real life. We are only able to bond through Zoom, which, as you know, is really difficult. It's better than nothing, but it's still really difficult to look at boxes and sometimes have video on, sometimes have video off, and really try to get to know somebody and know people's personalities. And so on top of the difficult content work, we were doing training that we would normally do in person and engage people differently. If anybody's done a training or taught a class over Zoom or online in the past 2 years and hadn't really done that before, I'm sure you, like we, realized, hey, this online teaching is something you can't just take from the classroom and throw on a screen, that there's an elegance and an art to teaching online that engages students. And we didn't have the training. We didn't have the know-how. And a lot of professors that I talk with don't have the know-how, still don't have the know-how, and didn't have the training. And so it's really difficult to engage people this way. Thankfully, we are working with 2 healing justice practitioners to make sure that we are doing this work with integrity and focusing on all parts of our bodies. So again, going back to the holistic safety and healing, and that as we're doing these difficult tasks and as we're learning as a group. So overall, the findings right now is that this is really hard. So this project that should have taken a year has extended into 2 years. And so we moved from phase 1. We went from July 21st to July 2021 to July 2022. And we ended phase 1, and we had a lot of great success. We developed a survey. We trained folks on how to do different types of research. We had our research questions set, and we were able to close out phase 1 feeling like we really accomplished something, because we did. We started phase 2 in August of 2022, and we met a couple times on Zoom, and then we were able to go to the Highlander again for a network retreat, an ION retreat, and meet each other in person and give each other hugs and talk with each other and really understand, the way, or start to understand the way that we operate in the world. So right now we are in phase 2 of the PAR project. So we will be conducting interviews very soon. We'll be starting in December. After that, we will work on finding themes, and we will be doing some draft writing. And we expect this phase to wrap up in February. Excuse me, I'm gonna end up coughing. And so what does wrapping up this phase mean? So we will have a draft of a report. At the end of the phase, we understand that this is really, difficult work. And so we don't want to leave people just hanging and saying bye. So we will have a kind of end event and, slowly end the work, not just abruptly. And our healing practitioners have been working with us and are a part of the research. Healing justice is a part of the research. And our healing justice practitioners have been working with us to build up our own healing justice toolkits so that we can continue to, as we disengage, we can also do the self-care and healing work that we need to do to make sure that we are okay. So I see a couple comments in the chat. And I do want to get into best practices. And I see a few things going back to those questions about what is police sexual violence in schools. Brad says an invasion of digital privacy, weaponizing of private information. Absolutely. And Marika says, this is such an important definition, especially since the girls I work with were experiencing the flirtation and didn't understand that they were being harassed, even though they were not comfortable. Yeah, in a pandemic during a racial uprising, yes. So I want to talk with you all about some best practices that we have figured out along the way. And when we wrap up, we will have even more. So you want to ensure that you have healing justice practitioners as part of the research team. And I kind of want to also take a poll. Do you all know what healing justice is? Do you have experience with healing justice? So healing justice, I mean, I'm sure that you've heard a lot about self-care and maybe even information about somatics. And I want to drop this in the chat. So Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective is really, they're really the folks that created or verbalized the healing justice framework. And the idea of healing justice is not just about self-care as in taking a bath, although that's important, or getting a massage, although that's important, but to think about movement work as places where in order to do this type of liberation work, we need to be in our bodies and we need to work through the traumas that we're experiencing. So thinking about not only or that we've experienced. So thinking about not only what's happening in the present, but thinking about generational trauma as well. And thinking about how do we heal in active ways as we're trying to do this work. And as we're doing this work, how are we taking care of ourselves and our communities to make sure that we're not burning out, that we're not that we're caring for ourselves and our communities, and then that we're not causing any more violence as we're doing this. So I highly suggest checking out Kindred Collective for more information, and thinking about self-care and healing as in community, that you don't do it on your own, that we do heal and work in community. And so with that type of understanding, we knew it was important to have healing justice practitioners who were a deep part of the research process, and that they work with the researchers to build skills, they work with us to build skills, and that they're there not only to support the researchers who are doing the interviews, they're also there to support the people who are being interviewed. And they're also there to support us because we're people too who have experienced trauma and that we're not always working on, and that we need to work on as we're going through this. Another thing is set up your tools and agendas well in advance. And I know everyone's like, sure, completely doing that every single time. But going back to thinking about what online pedagogy is and how to engage people online. Like right now, I'm sure that this presentation can be way more interactive. right? And just starting with this, with a number of young people, and I'm sure some of you are teachers and have already experienced this, doesn't necessarily engage them, right? Folks end up, not being on video and doing other things and not paying attention. And what was important for us was that it's important for people to be engaged, one, so that they're learning along with us and they're getting the information that they need. But two, we need to see people to make sure that they are okay. Because we're talking about a really hard topic. And I'll give you an example. Andrea Ritchie, who's been doing work on police violence and policing and police sexual violence for over 20 years, was doing a presentation, a training, and was talking for about like a long period of time about the different cases that she had worked on and describing them, not into lewd detail, but was, talking about all of these different cases. And finally, one of our healing justice practitioners stepped in and said, you know what, why don't we take a 10-minute break? Let's get back in our bodies. We're hearing some really difficult things. And I'm just paying attention. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, that's terrible. And it struck me that because of the work that I've been doing, that I had a bit of a callus that people who aren't doing this work, didn't have. And so it was shocking. It was more shocking to them to hear these types of things, whereas I had heard it before, and unfortunately. So I say that to say there are other tools that can be in place to help you work through that, to help keep people engaged and keep people safe while in the Zoom and virtual arena. Plan for hiccups. I mean, I don't know a research project that has gone smoothly, especially when you're talking about being in different communities, especially when you're talking about young people who are leading the research. So you can have the best timeline in the world that's super tight and just down to the minute, and you got to know that it's not going to work out that way. And that's still being optimistic, that it's okay to say that it's not going to work. It's okay, again, to go back to the second one, have your tools and agendas planned out. Yeah, have that stuff planned out, but realize that in my last best practice, and I'd love to hear more from you, is that we need to be flexible and adaptable. We need to think about what changes we need to make, maybe in the fly, and actually work on those, and have that type of adaptability. So I would like to hear from you. I went through all of that kind of quickly because I wanted to have time for discussion at the end. I came to this thinking that you all knew what participatory action research is and how it's conducted, but I can go over that. I also want to hear, if you have best practices, especially for teaching online, because it might not be in a classroom, but we are still doing some teaching and learning together. What are your thoughts? What are your reactions? You can unmute yourselves too. Olivia says, I have some familiarity with PAR and YPAR, but could use a refresher on the process. Absolutely. So PAR, participatory action research, and YPAR, youth participatory action research, are both research methods that put the power of knowing into the community's hands. So PAR and YPAR, the positionality is that the community knows the problems in their community. They also have the answers. and that the answers don't have to come from the ivory tower. It does not have to come from academia. It does not have to come from outside. What is needed and what is helpful from academia is the resources to help uncover these, uncover the problems and get to the root of them and help with solutions. But the communities have pretty much everything they need, just helpful to have these resources. And so there are techniques or doing participatory action research. The community identifies what problem they want to address. They identify how they're going to uncover information about that problem. So whether that's using interviews, focus groups, surveys, based on the data that they collect, they're going to figure out what other people in their communities understand about the problem. And then they're going to develop solutions out of that research. Okay. So really the power of the research, the power of the knowing is in the communities and with the young people.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we had a presentation yesterday with Chelsea Barbas out of Fort Bend, Texas, and they were talking about the role of police in schools and the history of policing in that community. And one of the questions that came up was, so the young people were exploring to push back against the police in schools, and one of the biggest inhibitors was they were working with a large immigrant population. So the parents were not on board with pushing back on this. And I imagine that some similar tensions came up with the young people that you were working with, and making beyond the healing justice and beyond you all as the researchers and facilitators and supports. I wonder what it looked like in that relationship with their families, for them to participate in this research, and also what did it look like with their schools? I know there was some intimidation and some hesitancy for parents to allow their kids to be involved because a target was on the back. Can you share a bit about that process of not just onboarding the young people, but their families and communities as they went through this process?
Yes, absolutely. So we're still going through it. And so what let me address the first part about police and adults. So there's so many in the US, a lot of people feel like police have been around since the US was started. That, as soon as, like 1776, boom, police. Not true. There might have been some unofficial policing and surveillance, but policing is a relatively new, professionalized policing is a relatively new phenomenon, like late 1800s. And, but the way it's sold to us is that police equals safety, and police have been around for so long. And so you can't take police out of schools, and you certainly can't defund police, because what would we do? It would be mayhem, right? None of that is true. And it's hard because it's been socialized into us. That's a hard shell to crack. And so the young people, even that we're working with, don't necessarily identify as abolitionists, right? The adults do. But we have to be very careful about not pushing our ideologies on them, but helping them understand the ways that policing is not keeping people safe. And so talking with people and starting with the political education that we started with at the very beginning about what does police sexual violence look like to you? What does gender-based violence look like to you? How do you know it when it's happening or when you see it? And doing that type of political education at the very beginning of any research project is super important, because you want to get people on the same page, right? You don't want to end up at the end of the project and someone's like, no, police, police need to stay in schools because they're keeping women safe and girls safe and so on and so forth. And so our process, again, has been very slow overall because of all of the things that I mentioned before, but also we have to take care that when we were in the early stages of the pandemic and students weren't in school, young people weren't in, like, actually physically in school, they were at home and taking classes on Zoom. We had to figure out ways for our young people to engage their peers in ways that would keep their peers safe and not out their peers if their parents or guardians or family members didn't know that they had that they were sexually assaulted at school and sexually assaulted by the police at school or an SRO at school. And so we started with a survey, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody. Okay. And we started with a survey, and the survey was a safer way to get to these questions because they could do it on their phones, or they could do it on their computers. Right. So we weren't engaging the schools because in order to engage the schools as a whole, we'd have to have buy-in from, multiple teachers. We'd have to do some other things that we weren't necessarily prepared to do. So we're starting with the young people and their organizations, right? So we're working with the organizations because the organizations are also youth oriented. And I also want to point out that it's unfortunate that young people still have to hide this type of violence that they have experienced because of, someone said this up in the chat, because of victim blaming, because people still believe that if this has happened to you, sexual violence has happened to you, then it's actually the survivor's fault. And I want to say unequivocally, it is not. It's the person who caused the harm, it's their fault. And so it's a hard sell. People can get behind police-free schools, and I've found that it's still kind of a touchy subject when we're talking about sexual violence, just period. I hope that answers. Yeah. What are some other questions that folks have? We have plenty of time. Brad shared some other best practices. School is where you are. Embrace that. I trust you to bring the best self you can in this moment. Brad, can you explain more about what you mean by those best practices? Do you mind?
Not at all. When we went into remote teaching, I was literally, because I didn't have the broadband capability, was literally sitting in the church parking lot in 15-degree weather, stealing the Wi-Fi to be able to teach. And that just set up that entire mindset. It's like, okay, school is where you are. So let's embrace the good that comes from that you can potentially be in what's a safer space for you than school. Mm-hmm. That you can have the things, you can create the environment that's comforting and best for you. So it was just to really embrace it. Maybe that's not a bad thing. And, we can embrace different personalities and how they act, or how they're most successful, it was finding my introverted students' performance was just shooting up through the roof.
Mhm.
So part of it was that it's like, okay, this is not necessarily a bad thing. So let's see what things about it that are different that we can capitalize on and use as an asset rather than going into it with a deficit model. Let's go into it with an asset model. So part of it was that, and part of it was, it was quite literally, I trust you to bring the best self that you can in this moment. And if your best self in this moment is you have to have your camera off, fine, because I trust that you will listen. If I would rather have you in class than not. So if you're in the car and you're just listening to class on your phone, that's better than just being, that's better than not being there. It's like, I want you here.
Mhm.
I want what you can contribute the best that you can.
Yeah.
And going into that mindset, it really was creating, I think, some healthy relationships and some good interactions. And we could still tease and play and all the other things that we would normally do. It felt different, but I could, it's like a situation now where we don't have a lot of cameras on. I try to have my camera on because I know that as a presenter, it's nice to have some face to connect with and react to. But I also had to trust that I knew the people that were behind the black blind, the black boxes,
Mhm.
and that I could hold in my heart who they were, even if I didn't see their spaces.
Yeah.
So it was creating that sense. And I had a whole year of students that I never met in person
Mhm.
and still built those relationships and still created. So those were the things that were going on my mind, was don't immediately assume that this is going to be a deficit, because
Mhm.
we can have people from all over the country in this room right now sharing ideas and perspectives that if this had been an in-person conference locally, we wouldn't have gotten.
Mhm.
So I always look at it as like, what can we bring?
Yeah. I also I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. And I've also said, like, if the pandemic wouldn't happen, how would we have pulled off this research nationwide? And that would have been me flying to New York, over here, flying back, flying here, and my co-lead, Connie One, we would have just been all over the place, which would have been, great. I get some more points. Super. Um, but it would have been a lot more difficult. So I'm certainly not thankful for the pandemic, but I am thankful that Zoom, it exists. I guess that there are online platforms. Okay, I don't work for Zoom, but I will take royalty, Zoom, if you're listening. And the other thing for us, it was a little bit different, or it's different because we're not classroom teachers, and we were interested in safety. Um, if we can't see what's going on, we can't, like, in our healing justice practitioners, the two of us as co-lead researchers, we were really looking at people to see how they're reacting and to see if they were okay. Like, if they were triggered, then, we have breakout rooms open, and our healing justice practitioners would private message somebody and take them into that room so that they could talk. That's why we really wanted to see, we wanted people to be more engaged and on camera. Yeah. Aura, you said you have some thoughts about how to engage.
Yeah, this is from somewhere. Well, one, my background is in instructional design, and I did a talk earlier about some ways to do it. But particularly in 2020, right? After the pandemic hit and everyone went online, I was working with one of the schools in Akron, Ohio, and we actually had students. They were missing, like, they were basically MIA for their core courses, but they were showing up every day and doing the work for hours. Like, ours wasn't even a required course. Like, I had created a curriculum to teach Black students the social impacts of artificial intelligence. And so basically, like I explained in my talk, like the materials, well, one, we showed up every day with just like energy. And so that seemed to make a really big difference. We just created roles that the kids wanted. So we had like what was it called? Basically like this DJ. It was like they took turns and they got to pick what music we would listen to. So that really got them, but we really made them, like gave them the ability to own the space. And so like we were protective of the space, but it was more like I have a saying, like, it's not our job just to cover content, it's our job to give our students wings. And so we found out what they wanted, and we were just connecting all the assignments in the content to their aspirations. And so I think that's the biggest thing. It's called situational factors. Like you start with the student, kind of like what you're saying, like where they are at, and then you use all of that to inform whatever you create. So we knew our students, a lot of them had one laptop or just their phones, or if they were, so we knew it had to be like 15, 20 minutes. Like we can't go on for like whatever. So I'm like, but this is going to be the 15 or 20 best minutes of your life, you know, like they might go in or have to go to a job or something else. And then just giving them creative ways to express themselves through Zoom. So sometimes it'd be like, you know, drop an emoji in the chat. How are you feeling today? And then everyone would do it and acknowledge like, oh, Lisa doesn't look like, you know, feel free to DM someone privately. So it's just creating all these pathways, using things they're used to. So they're used to texting and doing emojis, and all the content look like kind of stuff you would see online. Everything's in a conversational tone, even though we're talking about AI. Those are just some of the things, but even the principal actually met with like my nonprofit called the AI Education Project, and it was like, what did you guys do? We need to make that our strategy, because this is crazy the way these kids engaged, you know, during this very difficult time. So
thank you so much for sharing that. And you know what you're also speaking to are principles of YPAR, and that, you know, we're, as researchers, we're meeting young people in communities where they're at, and we're not trying to drag them to where we want them to be, right? Where they're the ones who are driving. We're coming with the resources, and we have an expertise and they have an expertise, and we're coming together to solve a problem that they want to solve. And also the young people are decision makers and get to control certain parts of the research that they want to do. And so we open and close every session that we have with, you know, check-ins. We'll have a healing justice, you know, break in the middle. Which isn't to tokenize healing justice. I don't want to say that, but to say we have specific moments where we're focusing on our entire bodies and not just what's happening in our brains. And we ask the researchers to do that. You know, we've been at this for a while. They have the skills. Like, what do you want to do? What's your check-in question? What type of, you know, healing justice break do you want to do? Do you want a healing justice break? Or, you know, so yeah, it's we're trying not to mimic policing, but we also have to have boundaries. Like there's a difference between surveillance and having boundaries, and sometimes self-care and caring for your community means telling people that they're out of line and they need to do something. Like, and because I expect it too. You know, if you're part of my community and as I say, out of pocket, then I expect to be brought back in, essentially. And I want to get to, I know we only have a few minutes. Olivia, your question is, do we have any results that we're able to share Are there any common types of police sexual violence that are occurring? Have students reported what makes them feel safe at school? So we piloted the survey and we haven't done any analysis on it. We don't have specific findings to the content of the research. The findings I have are setting up the research and what PAR looks like in a pandemic setting across the nation. I will say that colloquially, it's not just the police who are a problem in schools, that there are other adults that include teachers and coaches that are also sexually assaulting students, and that's a huge problem too. And it just goes to show that police are not keeping us safe. So if police kept our young people safe, then this type of violence wouldn't happen. But it's happening, and it's happening underneath their noses. It's happening by police, and none of it is okay. And I see Marika says also behavior deans. Yeah, right. So, but hopefully we're going to do these interviews. We will hopefully in phase 3 be able to do focus groups, so we get even more information. And yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, so right, so and this is true. So this is true. What Marika says, one of the concerns that even when SROs are flagged for sexual assault, they're moved to another building. This is also true in police departments. It's not that, they're fired. It's not that they're like they just move to another district or another place, or they get paid leave for a certain period of time, because again, for some reason, we are, as a society, as whatever, stuck on sexual violence as sexual violence as the survivor's fault, right? That somehow that it's the survivor's fault, and it absolutely is not. It's the person who causes harm. It's their fault. They need to be held accountable, and they need to be held responsible for that harm. All right, friends, yeah. So that's what I have. It's 2:06 Central, depending on where you are. I just want to say thank you for coming and asking questions and engaging and listening. And I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of this amazing conference, and take care of yourselves.
Thanks so much, Deana. And please check out In Our Names Network. And there were a number of resources that were dropped in the chat here. We'll be transferring those over to our resource directory so you can follow up with information. The Highlander Institute for Retreats, In Our Names Network, and there was another piece that you mentioned as well. I wrote it down, but I can't remember. Kindred, yes. So thank you for sharing those. That is really helpful as we're looking at this on the ground too. Are there ways that people can get engaged with this project?
Sure. Well, you're welcome to, you can email me here. We are, we're diligently working. We're meeting every week still. And we will have some findings in 2023 for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate you doing this deep work. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks.